procurement notices, funding and grants opportunities, lists of potential partners, insights into market trends, databases of development professionals, webinars, latest news, and much more. Stay informed and connected. Visit DevelopmentAid.org today and see how we can help you achieve your sustainable development goals together.
Hello everyone, welcome to DevelopmentAid Dialogues, where we explore the heart of humanitarian aid, most critical topics. I'm your host, Hisham Allam. Today we are addressing the growing trend of governments cutting development aid budgets and its potential impact on humanitarian organizations and vulnerable communities. Joining me is Isam Khatib, an expert in foreign policy strategies, international development, and human rights advocacy, with a focus on the Middle East and North Africa region. He holds a master's in sustainable development from the University of Sussex in the UK and has worked with agencies like USAID, GIZ, AFD, and SIDA. Islam's expertise lies in bridging development aid with policy frameworks to address complex regional challenges and foster sustainable solutions. Stay tuned as we examine the far-reaching consequences of aid cuts and strategies to address them with insights from Isam Khatib. Isam, welcome to DevelopmentAid Dialogues.
Thank you so much, Hisham. Thank you for hosting me, choosing this very critical topic and this, again, very critical timing in the whole development sector.
I'd like to start with the most recent updates about Netherlands. How will the Netherlands' 0.4 billion aid budget cuts over 3 years affect the sustainability of ongoing development projects, particularly in the Global South?
I would say to estimate what's impacted, we need to understand what is the size of this of Netherlands within the international humanitarian system. So in 2023, 2024, Netherlands made like around 1.7% of the total worldwide humanitarian budget, according to the UN OCHA, and from almost like $500 million in 2024. The size of the suggested budget is enormous because we're not talking about a budget that was 100 billion, then we will cut it by 2.4. We are talking about already limited budgets that will be again decreased. According to the statement of the ministers, they're saying that of these budgets, they will cut the partnership budgets with non-governmental organizations from $1.4 billion in the 3 years, 2023, 2024, 2025, to become 400 billion. So it's 1.4. So just to see how huge the size of this cut is. So its impact is not going to be like, yes, maybe a little less services here and there, or a little less engagement here and there. It's almost about cutting. I wouldn't say stopping, but like it's almost finishing, or let's say hugely limiting exactly the Netherlands' engagement in the international development sector. It's part of a huge trend that started in 2022.
Sorry for interruption, but I think the US started with Trump at his first administration when he cut supplies to the UNRWA, for example.
Exactly. I mean, it started as, let's say, cases, for example, for Trump, he decided to stop funding the whole UN. So it's not only the humanitarians or the international development sector, but for Trump, it was something, I would say, more ideological.
Political punishment?
Yes, exactly. More than, let's say, a decision based on, yes, we will reduce fund. No, it's no UN, so nothing related to the UN. So this is how I saw it. But again, just to show, as it was part of a trend, in 2022, the unmet humanitarian needs were like 40% of the total needs in the world, according again to the UN OCHA. In 2024, this increased to 70%, and not because the needs increased, actually the needs decreased by 10%. So it's the shortage of, the decreasing funding coming from different governments had led to this leap in the unmet humanitarian needs. So Netherlands comes now, but before it came the UK, Germany, Switzerland, France. So they're not the first, but complexity, I think maybe we'll discuss it later. It's the accumulative impact that it would have. So it's not a standalone action taken by Netherlands because they had one guy who decided to do something. No, it's not like a Trump case in 2018, 2019. Here it's a trend. It's, I would say, an approach that is being adopted by different governments.
So they are following the trend. So in the time of a tsunami wave of cutting aid from Europe or from the West in general?
I think so.
Minister Kleber, the Minister of Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation of the Netherlands, emphasized reducing NGOs' dependency on the government funding. Is this realistic, and what alternative funding sources can NGOs explore?
If the governments were doing their job properly, we wouldn't need humanitarian intervention from NGOs. So why humanitarian response? Why does it happen? It happens because government cannot respond. Because government, either because of a shortage of actions, expertise, interest, policies, they are not responding well. And from the other side, governments on the other side of the world, because of different, again, policies, actions, historical context, led to the crisis in those affected countries. So claiming that it's the job of humanitarian organizations to not depend on governments, then maybe the government should start doing their jobs, and then, maybe we won't even need humanitarian interventions. But coming to the second part of your questions, what other strategies humanitarian organization could take, to find other funding? So first, depending on local resources, local social interactions or social support from their local communities. So going local more than international, going to local resources, going to private sector, going to foundations to try to fill this gap that the shortage of government funding would do.
So they are forcing the NGOs to be independent and to find other resources.
I don't know. Maybe they are trying to push for the NGO to be independent, but at the end, I would understand it if it's not large-scale interventions. Can government be independent without any budgets? How would anyone take actions on a large-scale interventions without large budgets? I would say yes. Maybe if we're working on the civil society to say social change, I would understand it, because it might depend more on the local activism, the grassroots movement. But when it comes to actually providing services, how would the education sector self-fund itself massively? Not like a private sector. How would it help in areas under crisis? It would definitely affect the developer communities.
Do you think it is gonna affect only NGOs or the development sector, or also countries that relies heavily on development aid for essential services?
The impact, I don't think it would be only the NGOs. The main impact would be on the affected communities. Their lives depend on these interactions. So it would be the affected communities, the NGOs, etc. And if you look at it on the long term, it would be also the funding states themselves, how supporting affected communities, helping also the governments in the West or in the global North to deal with issues that they find as priorities, like immigration or migration, for example. This is also part of this response. So short term would be, yes, the affected communities. The long term won't be local.
I would like to have a live example. You are Syrian living in France, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Syria now has a new regime. We cannot speak about how it's gonna work, but Syria has been laying under years on sanctions. At this stage, they are trying to build a new state and often relies a lot on international aid. So at this time, when main players in the international community cut off the development funds, how would this affect the situation in Syria?
It's a completely devastated country. Like 60 to 80% of all infrastructure is destroyed. So rebuilding it would require a huge support from different partners, friends, donors, etc. So building this infrastructure, at least, is essential part to rebuild the country, which is achieving stability or sustainable peace cannot be reached without having the proper services, having a proper government structures that would make sure the human rights are respected, the essential services are provided equally to everyone within the country. So for now, when it comes to rebuilding the state, Syrians hoping that they would have a country, including myself, I would say having the hope that finally we might have a country to go back to, it would affect first the people inside Syria. People would again look to leave the country, and then 6 million Syrian refugees living abroad who are thinking about going back to Syria soon, as when we have proper country, would rethink about it.
Let's focus on the ripple effects on the aid sector. Could such decisions from the UK, Germany, and the Netherlands set a precedent for other countries, particularly in the EU, to scale back their aid budgets? If so, what might be the cumulative impact on global development goals?
I think what we are seeing now, it's already an accumulation, which was started before, and the snowball getting larger and larger. So yes, it's not setting, it already set, again, let's say, an approach that is being adopted by different EU countries. And the idea here, the European Union is the second largest humanitarian donor in the world. So budgets, it's made of different EU states. So when they cut their own budgets, they are also cutting the budget of the European Union budget into international development. So the ripple effect is already there. It already started, but we will see when it will reach all EU states or the European Union. And again, it hasn't started now, because last year, 2023, Netherlands budget for within the coordinated fund of the UN was almost 800 million. For 2024, it's 530. So it already decreased. So it's not like it started now. It has started a few years ago, including Netherlands. So its impact on the long term, for sure, is going to be enormous.
I'd like to discuss this point more, considering what you have said. Given the reduced budget, how should organizations and governments prioritize and distribution humanitarian emergencies or long-term developmental programs? How would this work?
Depending on whose priorities. For the states, in most of the cases, the priorities is political, frankly. It's not only the lives that they are saving. So for the governments, it would be which political objective this budget would provide me. Where would I better be spent? Is it to be spent in X country to, I don't know, deal with X problem because we have a good relationship, etc.? Or in that country because we have agreements and we want to minimize the backlash on us if we decided to cut. So for the government, the prioritization would be based on political interest. For NGOs, unfortunately, as always, the first priority would be the life-saving projects, because when the affected communities, life depends on those assistance, like health services or shelter or food security. The organization will prioritize first the life-saving activities, then the essential needs, and then it would be the long-term development or early recovery projects. I think this is what we face in Syria, and this is not the first time we face funding cuts.
But this is a punishment for the state or the government or for the people. When all the aid payers decided to cut their aid to some nations like Sudan, Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, because they are not happy with the regimes over there, who are you punishing? The people that these organizations are serving or the regime itself?
As always, it's the community who suffer the most. The lowest socioeconomic classes are the ones who suffers the most. The first thing that will get sacrificed, it's women's rights, child rights, etc. So the first thing to be dropped of everyone's priorities.
Following up on that idea, with the rise of right-wing governments like the one led by Geert Wilders, is their approach to aid reduction likely to become a standard policy in Europe?
I've been working on a policy memo regarding the migration policies in EU in general. The two topics that usually the extreme or the far right focuses on, we need this fund inside our borders. The second, it's the immigration or the migration that's coming to them. This is where the extreme right is doing something that just doesn't serve. Here I'm speaking completely, let's say, analysis disregarding my own opinion. But like even on their own priorities, if you're talking about migration, migrations. What are the main causes of migration? First, it's conflict, war. Second, it's climate change. Third, it's the economic situation. So if we're going to go and discuss the reasons for these, you would see Europe's or the global north role even being the largest or the second largest arms exporters, who made almost 30% of the carbon since 1750 till today. So Europe had a role in driving those migration causes. And then one of the solutions would be is supporting those communities in their own countries. So either if it's conflicts, then stop selling them weapons. If it's climate change, then support them to deal with the climate change impact. If it's economic, then support the local economy to flourish. But then people will stop migrating. They deal with the root causes, not just like block the borders, because you have been blocking the borders for 10 years. It didn't work. So the solution, or one of the solution would be to increase the international development support. What they're doing is that they're decreasing it. So do not expect to solve the problem by cutting the only good thing that you might be doing, which is dealing with the root causes of the migration, for example. The whole concept of cutting international development to deal with these problems, it's exactly the opposite.
So what does this attitude signify for the future of international solidarity?
At the end, international solidarity, I wouldn't see it from only governments. We would get it from the public, but not only from governments in actions. I still see how civil society in the global north and global south could work to overcome or try to face or to push back against this mentality or approach.
The new Dutch government has cited state financial constraints as justification for aid cuts. How do you see the balance between national economic priorities and the global humanitarian responsibilities evolving under such administrations?
This is always one of the reasons that governments say or they propose that we need to cut the budgets from international so that we work on the local level. I'm not saying that the whole humanitarian system, the UN humanitarian system, or even the INGOs are in a perfect state. But we need to read the approach, not the budgets. So we might be able to achieve much more using the same budgets. So what we need to rethink, it's the whole response mechanisms being used to implement humanitarian programs, but not the budget itself. Again, I see they say local priorities, but like at the end, on the short term, there might be other strategies you might take to increase the efficiency of the international funds they are spending, but not just suddenly cut it and expect that it would lead pushbacks on the long term. On the long term, it would have a negative impact, as I've just mentioned, either on the migration or on the soft power that international development has been always. They say USAID in the state, it's not like an aid distribution agency, it's one of the public diplomacy. So
on a related note, what innovative strategies can NGOs employ to maintain their operations and support amid declining government funding?
I would say the localization, depending on the local communities, depending on the local resources, rethinking about building alliances with other NGOs in the global south. But for some reasons, we believe that it's only global north that has the funds, but there are huge resources in the global south, maybe not just only economic, financial, and also human capital that could transform experiences between regions. I'm not saying only about between like Syria and Iraq. I'm thinking about, let's say, Latin America and Africa. And this is something, for example, we benefited a lot in Syria while working on the Argentinian experience with the missed persons there. So sharing or building on or learning from other experiences would be essential to how can we continue to work with limited resources. And then the second thing, it's looking for non-governmental funding, including foundations, public sector, seeing how can we build partnership between the non-profit sector and the for-profit sector. And then continue to lobby, to advocate. We should Not because we want this to fund, but to explain the long-term impact of these budget cuts on not only on the affected communities, but also on the donors.
So to wrap up, you have said that the NGOs should turn this challenge of cutting aid into an opportunity, right?
Not taking as an ended challenge. It is a challenge to push back against and also look for opportunities in other ways.
Looking at the bigger picture, with Trump regaining power, what parallels can we draw between his America First slogan approach and the Netherlands decision? What would his return mean for US foreign aid policy?
I don't know. I think he will take what he did in the last presidency and what turned into a trend in the last 4 or 5 years. So I think he will take this approach, especially with the cabinet full of businessmen. Like Elon Musk would be happy about the social welfare or any international humanitarian organized aids. So he isn't hiding it. They will take actions and budget reductions for USAID, similar to what the different Western country has taken. The impact here would be enormous. The US make over 40% of the international development fund, so the impact would be catastrophic.
So if the US, the largest aid donor, drastically reduces its aid, what would be the global implications for humanitarian and development efforts?
If we were in a situation where the US reduces its fund and then somebody else would intervene, maybe we would see how can we limit it. But like it's coming within an era where everyone is reducing their aid. So the impact would be on the developing countries. To give an example, in 2024, because of the budget cuts, the UN OCHA estimated that 50 to 60% of all health facilities in Northwest Syria would be closed by end 2024 if they didn't get the fund. Same applies to the education. It's estimated by the education cluster in that almost like 700 schools would be closed by the end of the year if there's no proper funding provided. Here I'm just talking about specific case in a specific country. So you can imagine on the large scale in different contexts all over the world, what could budget cuts do? In 2013, 2014, in Syria, we started to see cases of polio. And when polio starts, it doesn't recognize borders. So the epidemics that could spread, it's not going to be limited to the countries that are being affected. So unprecedented, huge budget cuts would lead to catastrophic situation, especially in the crisis countries. And then the impact would not going to be within its borders, unfortunately.
Isam, as a realistic expert coming from Syria and living in France, how do you see this situation? Are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Till now, the trend doesn't look good. So it is an increasing, it's not a decreasing. But like again, everything might change within one leader deciding and then take the opposite approach. For now, I wouldn't say I'm optimistic about this flip. We need to wait and see.
Okay, that's it for today's episode of DevelopmentAid Dialogues. We have had an in-depth discussion with Isam Khatib exploring the challenges and strategies surrounding the growing trend of development aid cuts, from the impact of humanitarian organizations to broader implications for global solidarity. It's clear that sustainable solutions and innovative approaches are more important than ever. Thank you, Isam, for sharing your expertise and shedding light on this pressing topic. Until next time, I'm Hisham Allam signing off. This is DevelopmentAid Dialogues. Stay informed, stay engaged.